The girl hadn't said a word in over a month. Not to her teachers, not to the housekeepers, and certainly not to her mother. But she watched everything, like a cat in a storm, quiet, tense, ready to bolt. Margaret stood outside her daughter's bedroom, heels sinking slightly into the thick white carpet. She didn't knock, just listened. Silence. Then a soft clack. Something being thrown against the wall again. A drawing, maybe, or the little ceramic music box her husband had bought before the accident. Margaret pressed her fingers to her temples. Another one, she muttered. This is the 4th this month. Downstairs, the therapist had already packed her bag. The housekeeper wouldn't return after tonight. Nobody lasted. Nobody knew what to do with a child who wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, and wouldn't cry. They'd all said the same thing on their way out. She's too far gone. She needs a specialised facility. She scares me. But Margaret didn't want a facility, she wanted her daughter back. That evening, as the sky dimmed into its usual grey, a man knocked on the front gate. No suit, no clipboards, just an old flannel shirt, faded jeans, and boots worn at the heel. A duffel bag slung over one shoulder. "Name?" the guard asked, eyeing him with suspicion. "Caleb Reed," the man said calmly. "I'm here about the job." The guard frowned. "You're not what she usually hires." "I'm not here for her," Caleb replied. "I'm here for the kid." Upstairs, Margaret stared at him from the hallway as he stepped inside. He looked around once, took in the marble floors and the clean silence, and nodded like he'd already been here before in a different life. "You didn't send a resume," Margaret said flatly. "I don't have one," Caleb said. "You don't look like a therapist." "I'm not." "Then what are you?" He didn't smile, just said quietly, "I'm someone who knows what it's like to lose the person who made everything make sense." Margaret's jaw tightened. She didn't reply. She simply gestured toward the staircase. "Her room's at the end of the hall, 3rd door." Caleb nodded and walked without asking anything else. The room smelled like lavender and dust. Soft light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the walls in tired shades of pale pink. There were stuffed animals lined up neatly on the shelf, untouched. A small easel sat in the corner with a half-finished painting, the brush stiff from dried paint. And in the middle of the room, under the bed, was a girl. She didn't move when Caleb stepped inside. He didn't speak. He just walked over to the armchair by the window and sat down slowly, the way someone does when they know noise can break something fragile. He dropped his duffel bag to the floor and pulled out a granola bar. He unwrapped it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, took a bite and waited. Still no movement. He didn't glance under the bed, didn't ask questions. Just sat, chewing quietly like he had nowhere else to be. After a while, a small voice, scratchy and unsure, came from beneath the bed. "Who sent you?" He didn't turn toward her. "Depends who you ask," he said. "The lady downstairs might say she did, but I didn't come for her." Silence again. "You don't look scared," she finally said. "I'm not," he replied. "You should be." Caleb took another bite. "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "I made the last one cry. The one before her ran out of the room and didn't come back." He set the granola bar on the side table and leaned back in the chair. "Then I guess I'm different." A pause. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. "Nope." "A teacher?" "No." "Are you going to try to fix me?" Caleb's voice softened. "Not unless you ask me to." Another pause, then the faintest sound of shifting fabric. She was inching closer. "You're weird," she muttered. He smiled gently. "Yeah, I've heard that before." And then a small hand appeared from under the bed, reaching, hesitant. He didn't grab it. He just placed his own hand near hers on the floor. Close enough, but not too close. After a few seconds, she tapped his finger, just once, then pulled back again. That was it. But Caleb knew. That was the beginning. The next morning, the house felt different. It wasn't loud. Emma didn't suddenly start laughing or skipping down the stairs. That would have been a miracle, and Caleb didn't believe in those. But the silence had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer, like maybe it had room for something else to grow. He found her sitting on the bottom step, legs pulled to her chest, chin resting on her knees. She didn't say anything when he walked past. So he sat a few steps below her, facing away, not too close. "Breakfast is on the counter," he said. "I made toast. There's jam, but it's the weird kind with seeds. I didn't know what you liked." She didn't answer. He looked at her sneakers. The laces were knotted, like she'd tried to tie them, but didn't care if they stayed. "My kid used to double knot hers so tight I had to cut them off once. Took me a week to get her new ones because she wanted the same exact pair." Emma didn't move, but something in her cheek twitched, like maybe she was listening harder than she let on. He stood slowly, walked to the kitchen and grabbed 2 plates, one with toast, the other with nothing but a peeled orange. He brought both back and placed them on the stair between them. "You can pick, or don't, I'll eat whatever's left." Still nothing. So Caleb took the plain orange plate, bit into a slice, and leaned back against the railing like he had all the time in the world. 10 quiet minutes passed. Then a small hand reached out, took the toast plate, and pulled it to her lap. No eye contact, no thanks, but she took a bite. And in that moment, Caleb didn't smile, didn't speak. He just sat with her in that quiet hallway, eating his orange like it was the most natural thing in the world. Upstairs, Margaret watched from the landing, her coffee growing cold in her hand. She didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't therapy, this wasn't a strategy. It was just 2 people sitting on a staircase. But for the first time in a long time, her daughter was eating. And not because someone begged her to. Emma didn't talk much that first week. Actually, she didn't talk at all. But she started drawing again. It wasn't obvious at first. Caleb found the first picture folded between couch cushions, a few messy crayon lines, and what looked like a tree with a single swing. No signature, no name, but he knew. The second showed up on the fridge one morning, just appeared there, held by a magnet shaped like a banana. A tiny stick figure stood in the rain with a bright yellow umbrella. Caleb looked at it for a long time. Later that day, he found her in the hallway, staring at the wall like she was trying to remember something that hurt. He sat down across from her and tapped the floor gently. "I saw your picture," he said. "I like the umbrella." She didn't answer, but her foot nudged the side of his boot. It wasn't much, but it was more than silence. That night, Margaret walked into the kitchen to find Caleb washing dishes and humming under his breath, some slow old tune that felt like Sunday mornings and coffee that never stayed warm. "Where'd you learn how to be so patient?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Firehouse," she blinked. "I thought you were military." "I was," he said. "Then I came back and joined the local crew. Figured if I couldn't stop people from losing things, I could at least try to save what was left." Margaret leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I've tried everything with her. Therapists, behaviour specialists, even equine therapy. Nothing worked." Caleb dried his hands. "Did anyone ask her what she wanted?" Margaret hesitated. "She's a child." "She's a person," Caleb said gently. "Sometimes that's more important." The room went quiet. Margaret looked away, her eyes glassy. "I wasn't ready when I lost her dad. One day he was making pancakes, the next, he was just gone. I didn't know how to grieve, so I just," she paused, "kept moving." Caleb nodded slowly. "A lot of people do." She wiped at her eyes quickly. "You think she hates me?" "No," he said. "I think she misses the version of you that used to sit on the floor and play pretend." Margaret looked down at her heels. "That woman's long gone." "Maybe," Caleb said, "or maybe she's just buried under work emails and guilt." She didn't reply. But that night, for the first time in months, Margaret sat on the floor of her daughter's room and listened to her breathe as she drew quietly in the corner. Emma didn't look up, but she didn't stop her either, and that small silence between them felt like a crack of light under a locked door. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big hug, no sudden moment of laughter. But one morning, Emma followed Caleb into the backyard. She didn't ask. She just showed up barefoot on the porch while he was fixing the old garden hose that kept leaking near the spout. He glanced over and raised an eyebrow. "It's probably muddy out here." She shrugged. "I don't care." So he handed her a small plastic trowel from the toolbox and said, "Want to help me dig a trench so the water drains better?" She nodded once, then knelt beside him and started digging without a word. That's how it was with Emma. No questions, no explanations, just small choices that meant more than anyone realised. Caleb didn't press her, he never did. But later, as they sat on the porch steps drinking juice boxes in the fading sunlight, she spoke. "My dad used to fix stuff," she said quietly. Caleb turned slightly, not wanting to startle her voice away. "He was really bad at it though," she added. "He once tried to hang a bookshelf and cracked the wall." Caleb smiled. "Sounds like my kind of guy." She sipped her juice. "Mum cried in the bathroom that night. I heard her." He nodded slowly. "Losing someone breaks things in weird places." Emma looked up at him. "Did you lose someone?" He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, soft at the edges. He opened it carefully and held it out. A drawing, crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small. The tall one wore what looked like a firefighter's helmet. "She gave this to me after I missed her school play," he said. "Said I was still her hero even though I was late." Emma's brow furrowed. Where is she? Caleb looked out over the yard. His voice was low, steady. She passed away 3 years ago. She was 9. Emma blinked. Her fingers gripped her juice box tighter. I used to think I could fix everything, Caleb said. That if I just tried hard enough, I could save everyone. He looked down at the drawing again. But sometimes, saving someone just means not leaving when things get ugly. Emma didn't speak, but she leaned her shoulder against his arm, just a little. It was the first time she touched him without fear, and he didn't move. He just let her lean. The first time Margaret heard Emma laugh again, it didn't come from her room. It came from the kitchen, a soft, short giggle that barely made it past the doorway. The kind of sound a mother remembers even when everything else fades. Margaret froze halfway down the stairs. She leaned over the railing, heart pounding, listening like it might disappear if she breathed too loud. Inside the kitchen, Emma was perched on a stool, hair messy, socks mismatched, watching Caleb try to flip a pancake that clearly wasn't ready. It landed half on the pan, half on the counter. Emma burst out laughing again, covering her mouth like she'd stolen something. Caleb looked over at her and whispered, "Swear you won't tell your mum." She nodded with a grin, still muffling the giggles. Margaret stayed quiet, eyes stinging. She didn't want to interrupt. She just stood there, watching the man her daughter now trusted, and wondering how she'd missed so many chances to be part of moments like that. That afternoon, she knocked on Caleb's door. He opened it, drying his hands on a dish towel. "I owe you more than pancakes," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. Margaret stepped inside. "I think I forgot how to be a mum. Somewhere between grief and deadlines and pretending I was fine, I just stopped showing up." Caleb didn't judge her. He never did. He simply asked, "Do you want to show up now?" She nodded slowly. "If she'll let me." Later that night, Emma stood in the hallway outside Margaret's room, holding something behind her back. She lingered there for a long time, then knocked once. Margaret opened the door, startled. "Hey, sweetheart." Emma held out a piece of paper, a drawing. It showed 3 figures. One tall woman with curly hair, one little girl in a red dress, and one man with boots and a baseball cap. Above their heads, in shaky crayon letters, it said, "If I asked, would you stay?" Margaret's voice caught. "Is this for Caleb?" Emma shrugged, but her eyes said everything. Margaret kneeled down, held her daughter's small hands gently. "Sweetheart, I think he already answered that." And in the quiet that followed, Emma leaned forward and did something she hadn't done in over a year. She wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. It wasn't long, it wasn't loud, but it was real. The house had grown quieter lately, but not in the way it used to be. Now, the quiet felt warm, comfortable, like a blanket thrown over a couch, or the soft clink of dishes in a kitchen after dinner. Emma had started humming again, mostly to herself, sometimes while drawing. Caleb never pointed it out. He just listened, let it be what it was. One afternoon, while Caleb was outside trimming the bushes that had gone wild near the fence line, 2 sharply dressed visitors showed up at the front door. Margaret recognised them instantly. Business partners. The kind who always smiled a little too much and watched everything like they were taking notes for later. They were here to talk contracts, publishing rights, forecasts. But at some point, while standing in the hallway near the study, their tone changed. Margaret was upstairs, sorting laundry, when she heard one of them say, "So, who's the guy?" "The one doing yard work like it's his house." The other laughed. "Right. I thought he was a plumber the first time I saw him. Now he's making breakfast and playing house." Margaret always did have a soft spot for broken men. This one's just smart enough to stick around long enough to cash out. The words were careless but sharp, and they cut deeper than either of them realised. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Caleb had come back inside through the back door, quietly. He'd heard all of it. He didn't say a word, just walked past the living room with his jaw tight and his hands clenched. Later that evening, Margaret found him in the guest room, folding his clothes into the old duffel bag he'd arrived with. Her heart dropped. "You're leaving?" He didn't look at her. "I told you from the beginning, I'm not here to be anyone's project." "Caleb, I'm not here to play a role in some polished version of your life that makes sense to everyone else." "You heard them," she said softly. He finally looked at her, and his voice cracked just slightly. "I've heard worse, but not from people I thought I could trust." Margaret stepped forward, shaking her head. "That's not what I think. That's not how I see you." "But you didn't say anything." She went still, and in that pause everything started to slip. "I didn't know how," she admitted. "They've known me for years. I didn't want to seem..." "Weak," Caleb finished for her. "No," she whispered, "real." He slung the bag over his shoulder, his eyes tired. "I don't belong in a world where love has to be explained to strangers." Margaret didn't try to stop him. She just watched as he walked to the door, paused for half a second, and then left without another word. Upstairs, Emma stood at her window, holding the drawing she'd made days ago, the one with the three of them under a blue sky. She pressed it to her chest, whispering something no one else could hear. And for the first time since her mother's funeral, she didn't sleep that night. The rain started just after sunrise. Not the gentle kind that taps against the windows and makes you want to stay in bed. This was heavier. Cold, steady, and unrelenting. The kind that seeps into your bones if you stand still too long. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the spot where Caleb's truck had been parked just a day ago. It was gone now, so was he. Down the hall, Emma hadn't gotten out of bed. She hadn't drawn, hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken. Her backpack sat untouched by the door, her stuffed bear face down on the floor. Margaret had tried twice to go in, to say something, anything. But each time she reached for the doorknob, the words collapsed inside her. So instead, she wandered into her father's study. The one room in the house no one ever went into anymore. The bookshelves smelled like dust and wood polish. She walked to the safe behind the old filing cabinet, the one only she knew the code to. She didn't even know what she was looking for. Maybe a distraction, maybe answers, maybe something to fill the ache Caleb left behind. But when she opened the safe, tucked behind a box of old tax documents and a rusted wristwatch, she found a thin, weathered envelope with her name on it. It wasn't her handwriting. It wasn't her father's either. Inside was a photo, slightly faded, of a man in uniform holding a young woman's hand as they crouched beside a rescue van. The woman was her, years ago, in another country, another life. Margaret's breath caught. She remembered the moment. She'd been trapped in a building after a bombing during a publishing assignment overseas. Smoke everywhere, a collapsed stairwell, screams echoing through the rubble. And then someone had pulled her free. Not a paramedic, not a local. A soldier! He'd carried her out of the smoke and sat with her on the curb while the medics checked her over. She remembered his voice, calm, grounded, the only steady thing in that chaos. She'd never asked his name, never saw him again. But now looking at the photo, she knew. It was Caleb. He had saved her once before, and she hadn't even known. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she realised she was crying. Down the hallway, she heard the soft creak of Emma's bedroom door. Margaret rushed out just in time to see her daughter standing there, clutching a crumpled drawing in one hand. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling. "Where'd he go?" she whispered. Margaret knelt in front of her, holding the photo to her chest. "I let him walk away," she said, voice shaking, "but I'm not going to let that be the end." Emma didn't say anything. She just reached out and took her mother's hand. Together they stepped into the rain. Margaret didn't even grab a coat. The rain hadn't let up. It came down in steady sheets, soaking the streets and leaving the world blurry behind the windshield. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in her pink hoodie, the crumpled drawing still clutched in her lap like a secret. They hadn't said much since leaving the house. Margaret had only whispered, "I think I know where he is." Emma had just nodded and climbed in without another word. They drove for nearly an hour, past the city, past the familiar stores and coffee shops, into quieter roads with older motels and flickering neon signs. Finally, they pulled into a narrow gravel lot behind a one-story building with a dented ice machine and peeling paint on the doors. Room 5. Margaret remembered it from a conversation they'd had once, late at night over lukewarm tea. Caleb had told her this place was where he went when he didn't know where else to be, a place that didn't ask questions. She stepped out first. The rain was colder than she expected, instantly soaking her through. She didn't flinch. Emma followed, silent, shoes splashing in puddles. Margaret hesitated at the door, no lights on, curtains drawn. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before she could. There he was. Caleb stood in the doorway, looking just as tired as she remembered. Same flannel shirt. Same eyes that had once pulled her from a burning building without asking her name. He didn't look surprised to see her, but he didn't smile either. Margaret didn't speak right away. She just held out the old photo with trembling hands. "You saved me," she said softly. Caleb looked down at the picture. Something flickered in his face. "And I didn't even know," she whispered. "But I remember how safe I felt that day, just like she does now." Emma stepped forward, holding out the drawing she'd carried the whole way. It was wrinkled, the colours faded from her grip. 3 figures holding hands, above them one word, home. Caleb stared at it, then looked at Emma. Her lips were tight, her eyes wide, unsure. "Do you want me to come back?" he asked, his voice quiet, directed only at her. Emma nodded slowly. And then she whispered, barely audible over the rain, "Don't let go this time." Caleb's breath caught. He knelt down, arms open. She didn't hesitate. She stepped into him like she'd been waiting for this exact moment since the day he left. Margaret watched as her daughter melted into his arms, small fingers clutching his jacket like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. He looked up at Margaret, eyes wet, voice thick. "Are you sure?" She stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "I'm not asking you to stay," she said. "I'm asking you to come home." It took time. Caleb didn't move back in the next day. There were no big announcements, no balloons or fresh starts written on clean slates. It wasn't like that. Instead, it was mornings. Emma waiting at the top of the stairs for him before breakfast. Margaret leaving the back porch light on without saying why. It was a drawer in the hallway slowly filling up with his things. A pocket knife, a flashlight, a pair of socks she forgot to wash. It was the first time Emma spoke in front of someone who wasn't Caleb or her mum, during a parent-teacher meeting. Her voice shook, but she said her name, clear and proud. Emma Reed. Margaret had blinked. She wasn't sure if Emma meant it as a nickname or a declaration. But Caleb didn't correct her. He just smiled. Later that night, as they sat on the back patio under string lights and a fading sky, Margaret finally asked the question she'd been holding for weeks. "Why did you come back?" Caleb looked down at the coffee in his hands. It had gone cold, but he didn't seem to care. "Because someone finally asked me to stay," he said. Margaret turned to him, eyes soft. "And is it enough?" He nodded. "Yeah, it is." Emma came outside a few minutes later, dragging a worn blanket behind her and crawling onto the bench beside them. She didn't say much, just nestled between them and leaned her head against Caleb's arm. The three of them sat there saying nothing, and in that nothing everything changed. There were no perfect days that followed. There were tantrums, spilled juice, missed emails, hard conversations, and moments when old pain crept back in without knocking. But there was also music in the kitchen again. Emma learning to ride a bike on the front lawn. Margaret humming under her breath while folding laundry she once let pile up for weeks. And Caleb, steady, quiet Caleb, was always there. Not as a replacement, not as a saviour, but as someone who stayed. And sometimes that's all a home really needs. Someone to stay. Sometimes the person who makes the biggest difference isn't the loudest or the strongest, but the one who simply stays. You don't have to fix everything, you just have to show up, and keep showing up. That's what love really is. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. I'm truly grateful you were here. If this story touched you in any way, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need it. See you again right here on Rain Inside.